Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Season 3 premiere of Press Coverage. Glad to be back here on the Going for Two Live network. I'm your host, once again, Kyle Senra. I'm excited for this season, and my first guest for this season is actually a former Going for Two Live member. So glad to be back part of the family. I could say here's a guy, and more specifically, here's a football guy, Kevin Coleman. That sound good, Kevin Coleman, football guys?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Bringing back memories. I forgot that we started our first ever show on the Going for Two live thing. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, you guys have a great. I love you guys a lot. I love Jeff. I love you. I love all you guys there at the site. You guys are great people.
Yeah, appreciate that, Kevin. And the Devi Royale started here on the Going for Two Live network. I know Jeff was a writer for us before. I think that's the connection. And Jeff specifically wanted both you and Christian Williams. It started from there. Now it's grown to. I know that you guys go for a different title now on the show. It's just the Football Guys College Show.
Yeah, it's the Football Guys College Football Show. So now it's kind of changed to more mainstream. It's weird. We can't be like as hot and takey and stuff on the old channel, but we still have fun.
Yeah, that's great. I think, I know I certainly enjoy listening to all three of you. I feel like you guys bring a good, positive attitude to the community, but also great quality analysis. So super useful for everyone to watch and check out. And so super happy to have you on.
I appreciate it, man.
But I guess, so couple of, if anyone's watched in previous seasons, I've got a kind of a list of sort of standard questions, and for this season there'll be a bit of a twist, and I guess I'll kind of reveal it as we go along. But some specific questions for the guest list this year. But as always, we want to start from the starting. So what were your first sports memories?
Yeah, so like I was trying to think about this. There's one that sticks in my mind, and it's funny because I lived in Alaska. So if people didn't know this, like I actually, when I was a younger kid, I grew up in Alaska from like I was like 5 to 10. And we were out in this middle of this. My brother worked at some place called Larson Bay in Alaska. You could only get there by plane. You couldn't get there any other way, or you could get there on boat. But that's pretty much it. And we had to call. You had to call the TV provider at the time. And because we wanted to watch Utah versus Chicago game 6. And at the time, it was like some movie. I think it was like Gone with the Wind. And so they actually had to change the whole channel for the entire town to watch the Jordan hit his shot against Utah. We got to watch the whole second half, me and my brother. My brother's 13 years older than me, so a little bit of an age difference. But that is how we got to watch the Michael Jordan game 6 shot. And that really sticks up to me because that was one of those times when I was older. I think I was like 8-ish, 7-ish. And my brother was older, so he kind of, we had to experience that together, and that's what sports is about. But I'll never forget having to change this entire little podunk town in Alaska's TV channels to the basketball game.
For some people, that like living away from the continental United States could be one big fantasy. So how did you go from sports or just sports to also enjoying fantasy sports?
Oh man. So I think for me, it got to where I was high school. So when I was going to high school, the biggest thing that happened with me with fantasy was one of my best friends at the time, his dad was going to a fantasy draft and they were hosting it, and one guy just dropped out last minute. So he looked at us, and we were 14 at the time, and he was like, "You guys want to be in a fantasy league?" And me and my buddy were like, "Sure. What is a fantasy league?" And we had no idea. And so, and now that I think about it, now that I'm old, I'm like, oh, that dude hated bringing us to his fantasy draft live party, 2 14-year-old boys. And we co-owned a team together. And so my first ever intro to fantasy was co-owning a team with my best friend at his dad's party, like at home league is as we call it now. And I didn't know what the heck that was back then. And it was so funny, like, cause we're Cowboy fans. So we drafted like Drew Bledsoe in the first round. Like we were drafting all these Cowboys, and we did awful, but it was just a lot of fun. And then ever since then, it kind of hooked us. And I played kind of sparingly throughout high school. Like, it's not as easy as it is now. Like I actually host a fantasy football league for my high school students at our school this last year. And we have like a fantasy club now, and Sleeper just makes it easy because it's like, hey, there it is, perfect. Like before you had to go to ESPN or Yahoo or whatever. And so like kind of sparingly just did it. And then it just kind of became like one of those things where really it's just a home league thing with my brother. Like me and him, that's how we stayed connected. Being older than me, like the one thing that we talked about was sports. And so we was like, hey, do you want to start a fantasy league together? And like, so we had a home league, me and my brother. Basically, we've had it it lasted about 13 years. And then the last couple of years with COVID and some other stuff with his job, he just hasn't been able to do it. And that's where it just stuck, like in terms of playing fantasy. That's really where it started with. And that's kind of where I kind of get my inspiration from, really, is I'm just a random dude that just plays fantasy. Like I wasn't really big on anything else. Like that's just, I just write and I just do content. And I kind of do it for the random guy like me that I didn't have a ton of time, but I kind of liked it. That's kind of how I kind of approached it day to day.
So it's funny. You've already mentioned a few key things that we're going to touch on. Well, first off, you mentioned Jeff Lambert, right? The big boss here at Going for Two, the founder, creator of all this great live network, checking in. So appreciate that, Jeff. The Cleveland connoisseur, Jamie, is also here, and Gator J, also saying Kevin in the house. So yeah, I think people are excited for the show, but specifically the guest. And yes. You mentioned teaching, and that is kind of the connection we're going to have. So I decided a couple of the guests I wanted kind of coincidentally happened to be teachers, and I'm decided I'm going to push that theme to the extreme, and I'm going to bring on quite a few teachers throughout this third season of press coverage. And there's quite a lot actually in the fantasy industry. And be fair, I've already brought on a couple in previous seasons, I think namely of John Lobb and Gabe Gearing, but still a wide reach of people that clearly have been inspired to want to teach the next generation. So Kevin, that's the next question for you is, when did you first get the inclination that you wanted to teach?
Yeah, that's a really, it's funny. You got me going back old school, Kyle, trying to think about like, my life lessons here, my story. When I was actually going to law school. So, for those of you that don't know, I got into law school. So like that was going to be my thing. I was going to be a lawyer. And then so, and because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I kind of bounced around from college to colleges. And that's what I always tell kids too. Like I went to so many damn junior colleges. It is a nightmare getting my transcripts because I just bounced around a lot because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I was going to go to law school. I got into law school, and then, by that year, what I did was I got a job offer as a coach. So this team needed to be, it was a 7th grade B girls team. So you're talking about like the worst team on campus. So it's the B girls, or no, it's 8th grade B girls, excuse me. And like just the worst team on campus. And it was 8th grade girls. And so they needed a coach. The coach quit right before the year. And I knew kind of like being in like the education world, you kind of know people. And someone that I was at school with was like, hey, they're really looking for a coach. And I had played pretty competitively. Like I had gotten into junior college football before I broke my ankle. So I kind of have that background. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I can do basketball. I'll coach it. So that year I coached that 8th grade B girls team. And I just remember like we won one game, Kyle. Like we won one game. We were that bad. But I remember that one game we won, and we were very close to a lot of games. And so, we, you have kids and coaching just kind of came naturally to me. And I was like, man, I really enjoy this. I really enjoy kind of helping these kids. And that year we had, a couple girls that are kind of a little tougher. So you get just like teaching, you get these kids that are tough in the classroom, or they've, some tough home life, and you don't really know what's going on. But again, at that time I was 22, kind of a dumb kid, and didn't really know either, like what was going on. And so, after the season, one of the girls attempted suicide. And I found this out, and I called their parents because they had told her about it. And the mom was like, I want to have lunch with you so we can talk. So I was like, okay, yeah, no problem. So I went and met with her, and she sat down and she said that her daughter was going to do this like 3 months prior, but the basketball season, apparently she told her mom, because of me and because of the impact we were having on the court, and even though we weren't winning, but the things that I did with the kids and made them feel like a team and all that stuff, she felt she didn't want to let me down, and she wanted to be there for her team and me. And she's like, thank you, because who knows, like if she would have done it then, maybe she wouldn't have been thinking about that. She said she thought about that afterwards, and like you were a big influence. And even though she did attempt it, she kind of did it as a cry out help, not like a full attempt or whatever that meant to her. And I was like, damn, like I remember I go home, and my wife now, who was my girlfriend at the time, I was like, I don't know if I could have that type of impact as a lawyer. Like, I don't know if that's something that I want to do. And I was like, I wonder what else I can do. I could coach. And then I was like, well, I like history because I'm a lawyer, and I went to I have that kind of background already. I already have that degree. And I was like, you know what? I could probably be a teacher. And to be quite honest, like, because of that experience with her, and I still actually talk to her. She's doing well. She has kids. Now I feel old. She has kids, and she's doing that stuff now. She graduated college and stuff. And so like that for me was kind of that catalyst of like, you could go be a lawyer, but like, where's your soul going to be? Like, do you think that's going to make you happy? Is it financial that you're going to make you happy? Cause yeah, I probably would have. But just having that impact with her, I know there's a long answer. I'm sorry, but just that impact with her and what she did and that team really kind of launched me into it. And it's been ever since then, you know, it's been a struggle the last couple of years, but I always go back to those times that I've had that impact, and I've had it multiple times throughout the last 10 years. But overall, just it's definitely been a wild ride.
Well, first off, no need to apologize for long answers. That's what we're trying to gain out of this, is these deep, detailed answers. But truthfully, like the importance of influences in our lives, like it speaks to it as a great example. So I guess my next question is, when did you start teaching? But I guess that's kind of answering it a little bit. But I guess I'll ask, do you remember the first class you taught, for instance?
Yeah, so my teaching experience is a little different than most. Like, so I got into a program. So because I got into law school, I had applied for the teaching credential program, and they were starting a new program at that school, the same school I was going to law school. And they're like, "Hey, we think you're a perfect candidate for this based on your background." And it was a co-teaching program. And so essentially, I actually became a full-time teacher. So in the credential program, those of you that don't know, usually you just go observe for a semester and then you teach 2 classes, and it's kind of like an entry. Well, this co-teaching program, at the first day, I taught 5 periods with my co-teacher. And we did it the whole year. So it's like you actually, and they paid you a little bit. So you got a little bit of a stipend. I think it was $2,000 stipend, which is nothing, but it's something more than what you get. And so like that first year, man, I taught 5 periods. I taught 4 periods of geography, a period of ELD, which is super great. So it's English language learners. Essentially, we taught Hmong kids English. So for like basically generation kids coming in not knowing any English. That was a really rewarding class. Like my co-teacher did more of that, but I was able to kind of observe her, and that helped. And then that year I also coached. I coached football, I coached basketball, I coached 2 sports. So it allowed me as a teacher to really get involved and see kind of how to deal with like everyday stuff. And so that first year too, the co-teaching, I taught 5 periods, but they flipped classes at the middle of the year. So you get a whole new batch of students. So my first year teaching, I taught over almost 200 kids. And most don't have that experience. So when I rolled into my first year as like a real teacher, or however you want to call it, like I was ready to go because I've already really taught 2 years basically under my co-teacher. And I taught world history. So I taught world history and AP Euro. And that's kind of where I've kind of been at. I've been teaching that and AP Psych since then.
I think, well, I've used the term, like, how do you call it? A 12 team super flex PPR league. It's not standard, but I always like the term conventional. So we'll call it, as a first year, as a conventional teacher, which is lucky you got your subject. Like you wanted to teach history, and you were able to get it right off the go. And it sounds like you've had it ever since. So kudos to that.
Yeah, it's been good. Like, and the cool thing about me, I'm the department head now. So like I've been able to kind of create things. We created AVID for the first time in our school, which is first generation college kids. So you get them ready to get to college. You go take them on field trips. We took them to a Fresno State game this last year, taking them doing those things. So like now that I'm in that position, I'm able to kind of help out in other ways. It's not just teaching about, world history and that kind of stuff. Now it's like, okay, hey, this AVID course is really good for kids to be first generation college kids. And I'm a first generation college kid. No one else in my family had gone to college or even graduated from it. So it's something that like I really, it's a passion to me to get those kids to be like, hey, you can do it too. Like, hey, yeah, I grew up without a dad. I was, single income. My mom worked 2 jobs. Like, I get it. And then from that perspective too, like I tell the kids all the time, like, you can't bullshit a bullshitter in the classroom. Like, I was that kid. I was that guy. Like I was that kid that I was a class clown. I made the excuses, like, but I'm still here. And so like we keep that vibe pretty well together in the classroom. And so it's a lot of fun. It's just it's been a challenge.
Back to the influence of the word influence for those kids who had not seen their parents go to college, maybe see like sometimes that, like, even subconsciously, that no, that's not possible, or I can't do it. And then, giving them the encouragement to say it. And, if I'm sure you shared your example with them too, of knowing that, just because my parents didn't go to college, I was able to be incredibly successful, and the hard work and dedication, of course, has to go with it. But sometimes just seeing the path forward can help. And I see someone else has joined us, Brian Ford, and a nice message here, Teachers of the World Unite, because he is a fellow teacher. In fact, a fellow history teacher, History Teachers of the World Unite. That's going to be our story for tonight.
I love
Yeah.
Brian. Shout out Brian. Brian's a good guy.
Yeah, Brian's a great guy, for sure. He's had me on the Dynasty Saturday Night 5 even just recently, so appreciate Brian for that. And he actually came on the Dynasty Gambit. My other show I co-host on the Going for Two Live Network will be on Thursday, by the way. Now, just living in the fantasy football community and world, have you noticed any similarities between that in the sphere, say on Twitter, and just your experiences with fantasy football, and anything that compares to your experiences in teaching?
I think one thing that Joe Bryant, the owner of Football Guys, has kind of talked to me about, he says that like he feels like I do a good job of essentially teaching people things, maybe complicated things in an easier manner or different learning strategies almost. Cause so like I enjoy kind of going over concepts or dynasty theory in ways that I think kids can understand and people can understand, because we all have different learning styles. Same thing to how I produce my content. So, I do articles, but I also do video content, and then I also do podcasts. And I think that there's different ways that you can produce it. Now I can't go to TikTok. I'm too old for that crap, but trying to figure out okay, what's the best way to do this? And I think some parallels with teaching is you can't get stuck in the same way of doing things. I think teachers will make that mistake. I had teachers in the past, it's the same worksheet from 14 years ago. They didn't change the date. There's things like that. And it adapts. Right now, kids learning for spans is maybe 10 minutes, maybe in a classroom. So we have 50 minutes. Okay, so am I going to do notes straight for 50 minutes? No, because they won't listen to me after 10, probably. So what I've kind of incorporated in my teaching practices is 10-minute video, 10-minute discussion, 10-minute notes, just trying to keep them off guard so that they're always kind of oh, I got to learn this. Same with fantasy content. If you're writing, it can't just be the same verbatim, one line. You got to break up your syntax, understand hey, put some videos in there. Older guy Sigmund always yells at me because he thinks that putting GIFs and Twitter stuff in articles is hey, they don't like that. Well, I'm well, the newer people do, the newer kind of consumers of content might, the younger people, those type of guys. So I try to think about it that way, and just how are they going to get this? And I still believe in articles, I still believe in writing, but video content I think is good. How to produce it, stuff like that. So I try to just, how do I teach? And then I try to put it in, I'm just going to teach the same thing, just different content to different people. So how do I do this? How do I get to everybody? And like I said at the beginning, I truly I create all my content for, it's in the classroom. If I can get that one kid that never pays attention or is too cool to ask a question, to ask one question, I win. I win that year. That's it. I'm done. I got you to ask a question. And so to me, fantasy is kind of the same way. It's if I can get that one person out there to maybe think a little differently, or doesn't know anything about Dynasty, but hey, wouldn't mind trying it if he doesn't feel too it's too daunting. That's what I go for. There's so many more smarter people than me in the space, and there's so analytics and all that kind of stuff. I will never be that, and I'm okay with that. If I can get the regular folk of fantasy just to be hey, let's embrace this. Hey, I'm gonna learn with you and do that. That's my goal.
Of course, the history teacher would appreciate the old school way of consuming fantasy, which I guess is reading over the internet. I guess back to newspapers, but the idea of we're not, videos and GIFs and TikTok isn't going to necessarily replace what we had, but just altogether augment what as a fantasy football output we are providing. And then likewise to teach you that the lessons of the past still need to be taught, but how do you incorporate a new lessons but be new ways of teaching those same lessons?
It's I tell the kids all the time, because I don't know, kids it's the same question every year, or the same statement. Why do I gotta learn this? I'm never gonna use it. And I laugh because I say, I go, it's not about what you learn. It's about it's not about the content you learn. So history, okay. It's about being well-versed in different subjects and just be well learned. Things. The most important thing in your life is learning things. And fantasy is the same way. There's always different approaches you can take. There's always different areas that you can go with fantasy that I'm sure you're the same way, Kyle. I don't draft now in Dynasty that I did 5 years ago. I draft a whole lot different now. I attack drafts in so many different ways. And part of that is because I've adjusted. Kids the same way. You got to teach them how to adjust and do those things. And it's totally a correlation.
It's funny. You want questions from certain students, but that's like one question you never want. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna learn this? How am I gonna apply this? And the one answer I always give to that is, do you know everything in your life that you're gonna do from the now until the moment you die? Every job you're possibly ever gonna have, and then they
Yeah.
think, well, I guess not. So then it's, how do you know what you're not gonna need? And that usually at
Yeah.
least gets them to listen for a bit.
It will. I mean, and I always tell teachers too, like, if a kid asks you that question, you better have an answer. Like, to
Mhm.
me, I teach enlightenment and AP Euro. It's my favorite subject in the world. And I'm always like, hey, your job is to know, dare to know. And I think that's something that we struggle with right now in society. Like, we're not daring to know. We're daring to tell me what to know. It's like, no, that's not what we're supposed to do. Like, you got to have that concept of like, I want to know things. And so I always tell them that. And I say, hey, go question things. Like, you should be questioning everybody once a day. And whether or
Mhm.
not you agree with it or not, question it and say, okay, I want to learn. Make me smarter. Like, okay, well, what do you see this way? And even if you don't agree, it's okay. Like, there's going to be concepts where we don't agree, but it's the idea of like coming together. And so that's what I try to teach my classroom. But I'm only one guy, so it sucks because I'm like, I wish I could teach everybody this, but I just try to make that difference for the. I have 165 kids this year in 5 classes. So if I can do that with 165 kids and I can try to like get them to do that, then I feel like I've accomplished something.
Show them the positives of why they should invest their time
Yeah.
learning this.
Yeah. And just, and I tell them all the time, like time, like I do a big time management thing in my psych class. And I'm like, hey, look at how much time you spent on your phone today. Think about like all that 11 hours or 10 hours. Like I had somebody had 8 hours of like screen time on this. I'm like, just think about if you just took 30 minutes. And it goes back to I coach. So when I used to coach before I had kids, I retired. They used to always get sick of me saying this. But I said, what is the one thing you have in common with everybody else your age? And it has nothing to do with like money or whatever. I said, it's time. How you use that time. How do you utilize it? And it's the same thing with fantasy. Like, think about this. We all know, like, you can be a great creator. You just have to utilize your time the right way. Like, don't spend hours on Twitter, spend it in creating something. Like, it's the same thing for all of us. There's nothing that makes us remarkably different. We're all pretty close to the same thing. It's just, well, how do we utilize your time and like, how do you prioritize it?
Actually, it's almost a good transition there. You're saying, we're all kind of similar. We can all recognize a bit of ourselves in each other. Got a question from the chat here, and of course, if anyone seeing us on Twitter perhaps and can't comment, come to the YouTube page because we can't see your comments on Twitter. And we've got Going for Two, Twitch, Facebook Live as well that you can connect with. But yeah, head over to the Going for Two or YouTube/Going for Two Live. And yeah, come in. And if you have any questions for Kevin, feel free to ask, like Jamie has here. Do any of your students recognize you from fantasy football content?
Oh gosh, Jamie. Yes, these kids are all over me. Like, these kids are like, they know I do it and they found my Twitter account. They go on my YouTube channel and like, but it's all good. They all hype me up there and they talk about it stuff. And then that's why we started the fantasy league this year, because they're like, we want to play in a fantasy league with you. And so we did a fantasy league together and it's been a lot of fun, but they don't even know this. Like, I tricked them because the kids that were in that fantasy league, like, some of them were a little tougher students. Like, they didn't want to do the work, but you know what they did? They did the work because we're playing in a fantasy league together. So they're like, well, if Coleman's going to let me play in a fantasy league with them, I better do his work and listen and learn. And like, so one thing it's actually just helped them do is become better students by just playing in a damn fantasy league with me. And then freaking, I can't believe I lost. I lost the championship game because Justin Jefferson had 3 points. If you would have had 6 points, I would have won. I lost by 1.5 points, and I will never let that. I'll never live that down ever.
Shout out to Jeff Lambert, who played. Well, actually, wait, maybe it wasn't this one. I remember there was a league. I won a final where my opponent had Justin Jefferson. It might have been Jeff in his zombie league. So I guess I'm sorry that happened to you, Kevin, but it helped me. But yeah, my next question was going to be, have you ever incorporated fantasy football into a lesson? Obviously, that's a pretty significant one. Okay, let's do a league within the class. And I noticed that on Twitter last year when you had posted that. So you can get into some of the more specifics of that if you like. But were there any other examples throughout your teaching history of just small incorporations of fantasy into a lesson?
Yeah, I talk about when we talk about economics. Sometimes I'll throw in some stuff because really dynasty can sometimes correlate a little bit to like values and stuff like that. The biggest part of me is like the biggest thing I did was started the leagues and did that kind of stuff with them and talked about it because fantasy is better. I don't know how you feel. Like, I love the home league stuff. Like, I don't mind online leagues, but I do feel like it lacks something. It lacks kind of the soul almost of like why fantasy is cool. Like, for me this last year, even last year too, like they just would come in at lunch and we just talk, right? And like have some fun about fantasy. We'd have trades and we'd be like, why would you do that? Right. Just like in your normal leagues. But like in this league, it makes it even funner because then it's also cool because we're talking about it in class, like in class, beginning class, we're joking around with each other, like, oh, Coleman, I'm going to beat you, whatever. And then these other kids are like, wait, what do you guys get to do? Like, oh, why do you do it? Oh, that's cool. And then so it just creates this, like, the biggest thing for me, like, I just finished my master's and my admin credential. So, like, at some point, I'm going to get into, like, admin and principal and assistant principal. But the biggest thing that I think of when I get in that role or even, like, role I'm at now, it's about culture and how you build a positive culture in your class. And I think that word has become negative in education because they say, well, have you developed a relationship with your students? And if you haven't, like, that's not the case all the time. Like sometimes some students, you just don't vibe. But if you can create that culture of like, hey, we're in this together. I'm going to see you every day for 185 days. You might as well get used to my ugly face. Like we're going to, and we're going to do things sometimes like in fantasy too. Like some things are not going to work out. You're going to have kind of those tough ones. You're going to lose. You're going to do these things. Like that's okay because we're going to kind of bounce back. And I try to relate it as much as I can to those kids and give them that because one unifying factor I will say, especially for boys that struggle, is sports is kind of that great equalizer between like teachers and all that. And like, like just knowing people about sports, I'll never forget this kid. And he's still one of my favorite students I've ever taught. His name was Armando. And he, as a sophomore, he was one of the tougher sophomores I've ever had. But for me and him, we vibed together because he was a Niner fan. I was a Cowboy fan, but we just talk crap to each other. Like we would just say, hey, Niner, like I would talk about the Niners. And we developed such a good relationship that this kid had a B in my class when he wasn't passing anybody else's. And like, then he got sent to a continuation school. And I said, hey, you got to come back because you're senior year. So if he does well enough at that continuation school, he'll come back and graduate. I said, you're going to come back and you're going to come see me and we can continue these arguments when you come back. And I will never forget it, guy. He came back his senior year that January and he was just, and I remember seeing him on campus. He just yelled my name. He's like, Coleman. And I saw him and we gave you a hug and like, and it was one of those things where he came back because he just wanted, I think it was one of the years Cowboys sucked, which, is not a huge outlier, but they were really bad. And the first thing he said to me when he came back, he's like, man, your Cowboys are bad. And now we still talk. Like he's on my Instagram. We still talk about that after he graduated. And that helped. Like he literally, like this kid, I like to think, and he told me, he's like, I really, every day I was at the continuation school, I thought about like, hey, I got to do kind of well on this so I can go back and see Coleman and just kind of give him crap before and show him that I could do it. And it helps. And I think it definitely worked.
You ever get that question a lot from just like the meetings, like you're talking about culture and the relationship? How do you motivate students, right? Like that question comes up a ton, I bet.
It's yeah. So like, and it's hard right now, motivation right now with these kids. Like it's so much worse since COVID hit. And it's not an excuse anymore. I hate using COVID, but it's just the reality of what we live in. Like motivations at an all-time low. And so you have to figure out different ways to do it. And I always stand behind this. The best teachers are not necessarily the ones that know their content the best. Like I know history and I love history, but I also know that like, Jimmy, for example, like he might not like history, but if he's in my class and we have a relationship to where like I wear a Giants sweater, he's a Dodger fan, I kind of mess with him. I said, hey, let's do this. Like, I'm going to teach you this. He'll do it because we've created kind of that motivation of like, hey, in here, we have a job, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to be like, striving for like better, like in the classroom and stuff like that. It's not like a mess around period. Like we work, my kids will tell you, I probably have one of the hardest classes, but they still like, they grind with me and we say, hey, let's do this. And we have that kind of just that camaraderie. And it really comes with sports. Like sports to me is a pivotal part of my teaching. Like it's always been, and it's something that you see when you walk in, you have all the sports memorabilia, you have like the college pennants, like that's how my classroom is set up. So when they come in, it's not just like, hey, shut up, listen, that's not their job. Their job is to actually, I tell them all the time, I hate a quiet classroom. Like it bugs me when it's quiet. Like it's weird. Like I want you to talk. I want you to be like on task, but I want you to, this is what this is about. It's not you listening to me because sometimes you guys have better ideas than me. And so that really comes from all of it. It comes from just having that motivation, that culture. And then like, they love it too when I screw up and I'll admit it. Like, I'm like, yeah, man, that lesson was awful. Like my bad. Like there's times where I'm teaching, I'm like, this is not working. And there's times where I've actually stopped it and said, this isn't working, is it? And they're like, no, Coleman, this sucks. And I'm like, okay, what can we do to fix this lesson? And then they'll actually take ownership and say, well, why don't you do it like this? And sometimes that's the coolest part of my job is like, oh, they become the teacher almost like, hey, this would be better. And then I change it. Like, oh, okay, well, next year I'll make sure I do it this way. But thank you guys for showing me that. And I think that's all part of the profession.
It's the balance between giving them the options and the choice to kind of help.
Yeah.
It's a classroom shouldn't be a dictatorship. There should be the give and take from both sides and the mutual learning. But you also don't necessarily want to bog them down with too many choices. So it's finding that middle ground and balance. And
Yeah.
I guess Zach has found his way into the stream. So hi Zach. Thanks for saying what's up, everyone. And I guess a message from Brian here. I found being myself and not pretending I'm someone else and being as honest as I can be helps, and also not giving into the same school culture they hate.
I always go back to the quote from Guardians of the Galaxy, Rocket, because he's my favorite character. He's like, there ain't nothing but me. Like, there ain't nothing but me. Like, this is who I am. And to Brian's point, like, yeah, this is who I am. And I'm not perfect. There's some kids that we just won't vibe because of the way I teach, but it's okay. Like, we still respect each other. But I have found that, yeah, if you're honest with them and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I expect. These are my values. These are the way I want to teach you. Most of the time, 97%, you'll be fine. And there's always going to be outliers, but honesty and just being yourself is key. Like, that's just the number one thing.
Yeah, to your credit and Brian's credit, kids are smart enough to know if you're not being genuine. Like, it's
yes,
the students aren't stupid. Like, maybe that's another thing too, is they're underestimated so much through the education process. We really should celebrate how intelligent they are. And yeah, maybe the knowledge isn't there, and that's kind of what we're trying to enrich through classes. But yeah, I think the best teachers enriching their students to not say everything needs to come from me. Like the learning process is just as much like the student's responsibility as the teacher. So can we do it together as opposed to working against each other?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's the thing. Just a collectiveness, almost like you got to have that collectiveness.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've kind of instituted again the culture of everyone. There's no one lower than the other. Like the culture of everyone, we're all equals. We can all coexist together and help each other. Seems like you've put an emphasis on that, and I'm sure your students have noticed that you've put the emphasis on that.
We try. I mean, every day is a struggle too. Like, I mean, there's days where you're like, who the hell are you? Like, what happened to my class that like we already went over this? Like, but it's one of those things. They're kids. I think you hit it on the head though. That last statement's super important. They know if you're faking it. Like they know if you're not genuine. Like, and I will honestly say, every one of my students, whether they like me or not, they know I'm me. Like, this is who I am. And oh, that's Coleman. It's me. It's good. It's just, I am a Portuguese guy who has a temper sometimes. I get it from my mother and my grandma. They were super Portuguese, and you know how Portuguese people can get when they get tempers. And I definitely, but I tell them like, hey, that's me. I'm sorry. Like, let's move on. Let's go. And like, I don't make excuses for my behavior. I just say, hey, that's me. That's who I am. Let me move forward. I'm sorry. It's okay to do those things. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. That's the biggest thing I tell them too.
It's funny because I knew you were Portuguese, so I was going to touch on that. Is it like so you're obviously your maternal side of the family is Portuguese. Is your paternal side as well, or
no? They're Irish. So I have Irish and Portuguese, and I'm a mutt for sure. I got a bunch of different areas in there. But my grandpa on my mom's side, so her dad was full Portuguese, and then my grandma was half. And then my mom and so forth. But like they are very into that culture still. But my grandma was like she was in it. So you're thinking of that. But then on the other side, I got Irish. I got all kinds of stuff in me.
Well, yeah. So I'm also half Portuguese, but it meets the opposite on my paternal side. But it's even closer. My dad was actually born in Portugal, so I'm first generation on my father's side, first generation Canadian, and then my mom. That side of the family is interesting because I don't know if you know. I guess you know history enough. You know Quebec and Ontario, and like the the French language in importance in Canada. My grandfather's a francophone from Ontario, the Toronto area, and my grandmother's an anglophone from Quebec. So,
okay,
I'm weird, and that's part of where that comes from. I'm just generally weird anyway. But yeah, so before we get too weird, though, I do want to drop this ad or a sponsor. And I'll say the word sponsor as many times to help Dan. I know he loves saying our sponsor, Underdog. And if you use the promo code GF2, like on the hat, like on the shirt. Capital G, capital F, digit number 2. Use that promo code when joining Underdog, and you can get a deposit match up to $100. So if you put in $100, they will double that for you on deposit. But you have to use the promo code GF2. So sign up for Underdog today. Kevin was referencing basketball playoffs earlier. We're not quite there yet, but still tons of basketball regular season games, hockey regular season games. I mean, I don't know if Underdog has curling stuff for the Scotties this week, Tournament of Hearts, but if they do, go Team McCarville, Northern Ontario. Let's go. But I guess back to that, Portuguese question. So you mentioned your grandmother, your grandmother was half Portuguese. So yes. She was born in America. Where, do you know kind of around where in Portugal your great grandmother was?
Azores. So she was born in the Azores in somewhere for the Azores, and in like they weren't 100% sure. It's one of those things where you know how the history gets passed down, it's kind of shaky. But the Azores is where they're from. I can't wait. I think me and my wife are going to the Azores in a couple years. I think we're going to plan it, so I'm excited to go back.
And for those who don't know, could you explain the Azores and how it relates to Portugal?
Yeah, so the Azores is it's basically a bunch of little volcanic islands in the macro area, like in the Atlantic. And so it's essentially it's one of those little areas outside of Portugal and its own islands. It's kind of has its own little culture too. And it's beautiful. Like if you're looking at the Azores, you're talking about basically 9 islands out there. It's a beautiful area, different little bit of a culture. And I think it's the best place to visit. Well, I've been told. I've only been to a couple places. I haven't been to the Azores yet, but they always talk to me about the Azores being kind of that area of it's kind of like a bucket list item. If you're going to go there, you go there. Maybe Santa Maria, those other places.
And yeah, that to just for the geographic reference, that's more southwest corner of Portugal to the Atlantic, and maybe do any of them enter the Mediterranean technically?
I think so. I believe they do. I should know. I taught geography.
See, I thought so too, but I wasn't sure either. So
neither put me on a spot.
Well, both of us need to research it a little better, I guess. Well, yeah, and my family is more from the north. That's why I'm really not familiar with that side. I actually went and visited when my grandparents still owned a farm in northern Portugal, and it's pretty close to the Spanish border. So. But yeah, I think we've checked through all the teaching questions and the bonus Portuguese questions. I guess this is more of a general question for you, and you can relate to someone in the teaching profession. It can relate outside of that too. But who are the biggest influences in your life?
Yeah, so I put down 3 kind of big ones. For me, I had a teacher in 6th grade. His name is Mr. Woods. It's probably someone that probably actually guided me in teaching as well. He was my 6th grade teacher. He was the first teacher to really I didn't have a dad growing up. So, and up until that point, elementary school doesn't have a lot of male teachers. He's actually my first kind of male teacher of actually, yeah, thinking about it. Yeah, he's probably my first male teacher I had in any type of schooling. And so he kind of was that first, I wouldn't say father figure, but he definitely was someone that looked out for me a little bit. And we just connected. And he was actually one of the first people to be like, can you see the board? And I'm like, no, I can't see the board, because I was in the back and I'd have to ask I didn't have good. I didn't know I needed glasses. And so we grew up super poor. Like I said, me and my mom, and it wasn't her fault. It was just, eye doctors are expensive with no insurance. And it was one of those things where you just don't do it. And so he was the first person to say, hey, I think you need glasses. And he talked to my mom and we talked about it. And without him, I could have gone there a couple more years, and people thought I had a learning disability, and it wasn't that. I just couldn't see the board. I actually tested high, and they always didn't understand why I wasn't doing well in school. And it was because I couldn't see. And Mr. Woods he found that out. He's like, oh yeah, you have some problem. You have eyesight problem. Oh yeah, I need glasses. So, so he, to me, was kind of that first father figure. My mom, number 1 to me as a single mom, she did really everything for me in terms of raising me, 2 jobs, was at every game. So I played 4 sports in high school. I played golf, baseball, basketball, and football. And she never missed 1 game, even though she worked 2 jobs. That woman was at every game in the same spot. I'd see her. She worked graveyard, so she'd literally come watch me play and then drive to her job to do that. And so she was a big influence on me. And then from a professional standpoint, I would say Joe Bryant from Football Guys. He, especially in this space, he hired me about almost a year ago. And ever since then, to me, Joe has been Joe. If you never met Joe, Joe is the type of guy that you want to work for, especially in fantasy. He's just the guy that he gives you advice. He's willing to tell you kind of like, hey, this isn't how I would do it. He's a good dude. He's a family guy. He's a Christian. He's just everything that you're like, hey, if I was going to work in the space, I would love to work for someone like Joe Bryant. And to me, he fits that. So from a professional standpoint in this space, I wanted to make sure I mentioned Joe because of how much he means to me, just as a content creator.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've gotten influence from doing this show. Like there's been a few. I'm not the first fantasy football interview one-on-one podcast. I mean, Football Guys has Sigmund Bloom. That's probably the gold standard for that. Sam Holt had the one-on-one with Sam. Casey Kasem in her Get Real podcast, and she actually had Joe Bryan on for an episode. I recommend people check out all of Casey's episode, but certainly that one. Joe's story is quite amazing, and everything he did to create and make Football Guys what it is today, and how much he gives back and cares about the community is super apparent.
Yeah, he's a special guy. Like Joe is. I've never quite met someone like Joe, especially Kyle's been in the space long enough. Like sometimes you work for people and companies and they don't know your name. Like they just, oh, hey, this is your content and this is where it is. And Going for Two is not like that because Jeff is a super sweet guy. And like he's
even checked in on test tonight.
Yeah. Lambert is, I don't talk to Jeff a lot. We never really have crossed paths, but I know that he's a good person. And so like, he's one of those other guys, like if you're going to work for someone in the space, Jeff's the perfect guy to do that because he cares about you as like a person first. And like, I think Joe, he's the same way. Like, hey buddy, how are you doing? Like he doesn't ever ask me about fantasy content, like unless we have to talk about it. But other than that, it's like, hey, how is your kids? Like, and he remembers the names and he remembers like little things like that you're like, dude, I'm just some random guy on the internet you hired, like, but he's still like, he goes out of his way to help you. And you can't say enough about that kind of person.
Yeah, for sure. It's always great. And it makes us feel good and happy to be, appreciated by the people we're working for.
Yeah. 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 And that's hard because this industry is not appreciative very much. Like there's a lot of like negative in the industry. So if you find people like that, you stick with them because that's what loyalty is for.
Yeah, being happy. That's always so important. And yeah. I know our hobbies and the things we do outside of, for us, it's sports and content creation and teaching. Those hobbies can help. And you mentioned psychology classes and the balance and the things you have to do to kind of, get your mental state up to be able to, whether it's work or learn or both. So what are some of your favorite hobbies outside of the sports realm?
Yeah, well, I don't have any hobbies right now after I wrote the rookie guide and I'm working on the manifesto. But if I'm not doing like fantasy content, my kids, number one, just hanging out and, just like tomorrow they start softball for the first time. They're going to play on the same team. And like, I try to spend as much time as I can there. Golf when I can, like I enjoy golf a lot. It's just, I've golfed a lot more before I had children. It's a lot harder to go out and golf for 6 hours with kids at home and the wife, like, what the hell are you doing? And so like, kids golf, video games. I don't do it as much as I used to when I was a kid, but like, I just bought like the Harry Potter game. My kids are starting to get to that age, Kyle, where like they could play with me. So I'm kind of parlaying it now into like, hey babe, I'm hanging out with the kids. And so like we played, my older daughter and me, and my youngest is 4, so she's kind of borderline, but my oldest is 5.5. And we played Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, which is actually really good. I wasn't expecting it to be good, but they love Guardians, so I was like, yeah, let's get it. And like we played the whole thing together, and they were so excited every day, like, hey, can we play video games? I'm like, yeah, you asked, let's do it. So like, video games for sure, golf, kids, and I like reading. I'm reading a book. We're going to talk about books here, but it's different books, audible books. Like I don't consume a lot of content from fantasy perspective, like in the space. I kind of just do my own thing because I don't like to steal narratives and steal takes and those type of things. So like I spend my time reading a lot of books and audible books and stuff like that. So those are kind of what fills my life right now as a 34-year-old middle-aged man.
I'm thinking back, and maybe it's, I don't know. It sounds like your wife doesn't golf, but I know for both my parents really love golf, and I think the reason they pushed me and my sister to golf so much is that they could just spend more time golfing. Like I'm starting to realize that now. That's why they did that. Huh.
My daughter will. It's so funny because like my daughter will. She's starting to get in that. She's 6-ish. She's gonna turn 6 here pretty soon, and I'm always like, she's like, "Can I go golfing with you, Daddy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, if you want to." Like, and we'll get out there, and then she asks like four holes. And then I'm like, all right, here's some candy. She'll ask another couple holes. And then like by the ninth hole, it's like, all right, we'll go home. But like, it's fun. Like, as kids, you just want them to have fun and do these things. Like, if I can do it, but golf's it's hot out here, California. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say they just had the PGA event this weekend in California, right in LA. So clearly it's they won't be having the Canadian Open in January and February. That's for sure.
No, little colder in those areas.
You might lose your ball in the snow, and also the green. So I guess you've shared a lot. You're teaching history and things about your family, so your hobbies. But is there anything that the fantasy community doesn't know that you're giving us the exclusive today on?
Not
you're too genuine and open book, right? That's gonna be difficult.
Not from like anything from that mindset in terms of like the only weird thing that's ever really happened to me that people usually like no way is like when I lived in Alaska when I was 7 years old, I actually got ran over by a bear. And I got like 50 yards. So it carried me 50 yards and then let me go. We were at basically a national I don't know if you've ever heard of have you ever heard of the bear guy that got eaten alive? I don't know if you've ever heard of the guy in Alaska. He was kind of famous for a little while. That's the spot where we were at because my dad, but before he left, before like I didn't have a dad when I was younger, he worked there as a guide, and so he actually would guide people out. And so we were walking down a trail, and my dad had a guide for a bunch of people from Switzerland, and they were yelling that something was coming. And all I remember, I was holding my dad's hand, and it was like a small trail, but I was the only one there's two people, and this mama bear was running away from a big bear trying to get her cub, and she just hit me in the back. And it threw me for 50 yards. My mom started chasing it. I don't know what the hell she was going to do, but she started chasing the bear to get me. And so like a 7-year-old, and then it just let me go. And all I remember from it, all it did was it actually knocked my shoe off. And they gave me a little pin. I still have it somewhere in storage, and I survived a bear attack. So that's pretty much the only thing that maybe people don't know.
Smelt you and you're like, you're not my kid. Get away.
Yeah, just drop me. Just straight up, just drop me. And then and I just remember I was super sore after that, but that was about it.
Well, yeah, I was saying you look pretty fine for someone who was attacked by a bear. So good. We're glad to have you, Kevin.
Yeah, no, it's a good story though. It's always a good story, and I have the pin in that newspaper clipping. So like when people like try to tell me that, oh, you're lying, like nope, I was me, like that's me, I did it, and they always laugh. They can't believe that actually happened.
Yeah, it's almost like the shock of it, like you almost couldn't even react. It happened so quickly, probably, right?
Oh yeah, I didn't know what happened. Like I didn't even know what happened till like even
the
when
bear was gone and
like my mom grabbed me. Like I just thought I got thrown. Like I thought someone threw me on the ground. I didn't even know like it was a bear. Like it was just so quick. I still have like a memory of like walking, and then like I have a memory of like my mom grabbing me, but that was it. Like I don't have any of the memory of like getting hit, and I just have the memory the next day waking up in the hotel room so sore that I could not move. Like we just stayed in the hotel room. I got to watch cartoons all day. And after that, yeah, that's the only memory I have.
It's weird because it's almost, maybe it would have been worse for you, not to get macabre and dark here, but if you had kind of been panicking and freaking out, like the bear would have been a bit more violent and freaked out. So the fact that you like almost were unaware might have been the best that it happened just so quickly.
100%. It was 100% better that way. So that like it didn't affect me in any way.
Yeah, well, perfect. Glad to hear that. And we'll get to the funner topic. We'll talk fantasy now. And we'll talk about preferences. So what is your preferred league format? Although, again, knowing you're on the Devi Royale and the Football Guys College Football, I have a feeling I think I know where this answer is going to be, but feel free to share.
No, you're going to be surprised. Like, I actually don't think my preferred format is Devi or college fantasy. It's definitely not college fantasy. Like Campus Can, they like to call it, or college, or whatever you want to call it there. Like, I actually don't like that as much. I don't mind. Like, I enjoyed college football, but like, it's so like, there's so many players and it's so hard to keep track of some guys. Like, I get why. To me, like, I like playing in those leagues, but I'm not preferred. My preferred actually like league format is a 16-team super flex 4-point passing touchdown tight end premium. So 1.5 tight end premium. So heavy tight end premium and super flex for 16 teams, because I think that creates the coolest roster building possible with the quarterback position being so like insane with how it's kind of built. I absolutely love that format. And I played in a league like that for 5 years. It folded this year, but it was one of the like my favorite leagues to play in, just because it's so interesting. You can either go heavy tight end or you have to grab that quarterback, and because it's 4-point passing touchdowns, they're not weighted as heavy, even though in 16 team they are. Like I love leagues that make you kind of think about roster construction and how to build a roster. And 12-team leagues, to me, it's kind of like you can kind of get away with it. Roster construction is still there, but 16-team is a lot of fun.
All right, awesome. So yeah, focus on the total number of teams. Get more people involved, right? You're a people person. Let's get everyone involved.
Just more teams. I think more teams leads to more trades too, and more activity and stuff like that. I will say the only downfall to a 16-team league is you have a lot more turnover, and like highly recommend making them pay for like their the dues if they trade first, obviously in the next year, especially in a 16-team league, because it's so hard to fill orphans in those type of leagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a kind of a good. That's one rule that you should have in every league, right? But that is the next question. So I don't know if you want to have that as your answer, but if you spend and I mean, I know in some leagues it might be extreme. Like you spend a future fourth, you got to pay for that year, but at the very least, a future first, paying that year in advance, and that way, again, helping with the orphans. If someone does have to take over, okay, well, you don't have to pay a league due this year if you don't have a pick. So, is there something else though that you'd like to add?
Sorry. So I would say if you're going to do that, like the pay thing, I think one thing you could do is like a percentage based on the draft pick. So like first it's 150% for seconds and so forth, like have it like that. I think part of that is like something you could do. No, the rule that I think every league should have is league median scoring. So you basically will play against whoever you play against. So you and me are playing and you score 190, I score 185. We're the two highest scorers. Why should I get a loss? Like, that's not fair. Like, I should at least get something. And so league median, what it does, it takes the median scoring from everybody in the league. And if you score higher than that, you get a win. So like you'd get 2 wins. I'd get 1 and 1. And I think one thing it does is balances out those teams. And like, if you have a good team, you just go up against the highest one. And that's one of the worst losses ever. And some people think it's part of fantasy, which fine. If like, that's what you want to do, like that's fine. But I really think that median scoring should be implemented in every single league out there.
Because if you go to your league scoring like points for, points against, there's probably a good chance, maybe even more so than like what the points for score, but the points against, you're very likely going to see their top teams with the fewest points against and the lowest teams with the most points against, almost regardless of where the points for are distributed. So
yeah,
it's a good point with the median scoring. Apparently Brian, a 16-teamer gives him anxiety, so it's a little extreme for some people, but this is Kevin's episode. So Kevin, your next next 4 preferences here. So all-time fantasy players at each position: QB1, RB1, wide receiver 1, and tight end 1.
So we're just picking guys that we like that were QB1s, or like how do you want me to answer this? Because I was kind of like confused.
Yeah, so usually I'd say like the guest gets their way. So however you want to answer it, whatever you find easier, if it's based purely on points or just whatever you favored players, you can go either way. If you want to answer both too, that's perfectly fine.
I just went straight into so this is how I did it. I just went straight into these dudes are awesome to watch the position. I loved having them on my fantasy team. So I put I'm old enough to say I put Michael Vick on my roster here. Like if in high school, like Michael Vick at QB1, he's a cheat code. And could you imagine him now in Konami code? Like these, like I would just love to watch Michael Vick present day, like in the league right now. LaDainian Tomlinson was one of the greatest running backs I've ever watched play in fantasy perspective. That dude was throwing touchdown passes, catching PPR, everything there. So for me, he's running back 1. I put Antonio Brown as my wide receiver 1 because people forget how good Antonio Brown was in Pittsburgh for those 4 years in fantasy. I mean, he was dominant. And before, obviously, Antonio Brown, we've seen the last couple of years, he was dominant in Pittsburgh. And then Travis Kelce, I'll put him at tight end 1. I almost went Antonio Gates, but I didn't want to feel so old, so I went Travis Kelce here.
You can have 2 Chargers as your answer after all. People think you're biased for your California.
Yeah, that's fair. Like I was like, nah, I can't. I'm gonna go off the board a little bit, and I not off the board, but off there. I like Kelce there. I think he's just dominant, man. Like when you just watch him, I could have put Gronk up there too, but just for longevity and what he was able to do.
Zach's mentioning Julio, and like Julio and Antonio at that, like the mid 2010s that they were just so dominant. I believe Antonio Brown was the number one wide receiver 3 straight years from 2014 to 2016. And I think Jerry Rice was the last person to do something like that. So it's,
Pretty special.
I can definitely understand. My first ever fantasy championship, Antonio was my wide receiver 1, and I believe it was 2014. So, he had a great 2013, if I remember, but he wasn't the wide receiver 1. So I think he was still like a 3rd round pick. And when your 3rd round pick ends up being the wide receiver 1 overall, I guess people saw that maybe with Cooper Kupp in 2021. But yeah, that could be quite the way to elevate your team. So yeah, I love the Antonio Brown pick as much as we may not love his antics at the end of his career. And Jamie mentioning Tomlin. Oh, hey, a similar story. Tomlinson was my first ever draft pick back in 2004 and won him the league. So again, we're both agreeing with your players. They're clearly, I'm sure Antonio Brown and Tomlinson help you win leagues too, Kevin.
Yeah, Tomlinson helped me win a few. I had Thomas a lot, and I love watching him. Antonio as well. One of my first leagues, in that home league I was talking about earlier with my brother, I won a league with Antonio Brown. I'll never forget that team. That team was stacked. I only lost one game that year. You know how you remember those, like those fun leagues that you play? You're like, oh yeah, I whooped all your guys' butts. I had Antonio Brown on that roster.
I was going to say the zombie league this year, I went 11-1 before the playoffs. And then there's like a bit of like almost like everyone made the first round of the playoffs, but 2 teams were eliminated every week. And then that real playoff started after. And yeah, I obviously didn't get eliminated, and then won all my playoff games. Went 11-1 in the regular season. So that's probably the closest I've come to a perfect season. No, probably. Yeah. It definitely is. So thanks, Jeff, again for organizing the zombie leagues. I like winning. But yes, high five for us winners. And we're going to get to our high five section. So top 5 categories. You're a top 5 in 5 different categories. And, well, you already referenced books, so I know that was second on the list, but did you want to get to that first? Because you mentioned talking about the books. I don't know if you want to pull an audible. And
yeah, we can go to books. I try to be all over the place a little bit in terms of this, but like my books like that I've kind of read recently, this is one of my favorite books I've read probably in the last 5-10 years. I Came as a Shadow, and it's a John Thompson autobiography. He used to be the college coach at Georgetown. It's a fantastic book. It talks about life, coaching. It talks about like Allen Iverson when he coached him, Patrick Ewing, how he did it. And it also goes to kind of the racial struggles that he faced going to like a private school, Big East basketball, Boeheim. Like if you're a basketball fan, and if you're just like a fan of like college basketball in general or a coach, like I Came as a Shadow is a book that I can't recommend enough for everybody out there. Then another book, I'm gonna go through my 5. Happiness Hypothesis is something I'm reading with my class. So we have a book club for extra credit for my AP Psych class, and it talks about like how to be happy. And so it kind of breaks down like what kids should do and how adults should do it. So it's called the Happiness Hypothesis. Third one is a football book. It's Better to Be Feared, the New England Patriots Dynasty and the Pursuit of Greatness. And I also read the Belichick book, so I just combined them. I'm fascinated by coaches and like that kind of coach and Belichick and everything there. Like I'm fascinated how they kind of build dynasties and stuff. It's a really great book. It's like 600, 700 pages though. So, if you had to have some time there, but I read it during COVID. I thought it was great. Bill Simmons, The Book of Basketball. So as a basketball coach, Bill Simmons, it was kind of the holy grail of basketball, probably 10, 12 years ago now. But I know he's added some things there. And then Shoe Dog. And I don't know if you know it this way. It's a memoir of the creator of Nike. So Phil Knight, and it goes through kind of how Nike got started. They turned it into a book or a movie. The movie's coming out. If you watched the Super Bowl, you saw the previews for it. But Shoe Dog is a great book.
Is that why you wore the sweater with the Nike swoosh on it? Just to reference that further.
Just because I'm cold. It's cold in my house. It's just
It's funny. The guy in California is wearing the sweater. The dude in Canada is wearing a t-shirt. I do have the heat on, to be fair, but yeah. Before we get to the high five, just from your earlier talk with the 16 teams, Zach Linton mentioning he's in the Dynasty Trades HQ 1 league, and that's the only 16 team they've done. I know they've talked about on the pod how, okay, we're never doing that again. That's too ridiculous. So every iteration of HQ since has been a little less. I'm in HQ 2, and that one's just 14, but still the 14 team Superflex, I can tell like that scarcity gets pushed higher than your average league. So I imagine it's 16 teams. It's even more to the extreme.
Yeah, it can be extreme. It's insane.
All right, so we'll go with top 5 artists or bands as the next topic.
I'm gonna disappoint a lot of people here because I am not really like a music connoisseur. So just everybody out there, just know like I'm a podcast guy. My top 5 Red Hot Chili Peppers. I am a big fan of that. My daughters love the Red Hot Chili Peppers. With me, like we'll make breakfast in the morning. We'll listen to it. Outkast. I'm a very I love Outkast. I think they're one of my favorite. I guess you call them a band. Together, just a group. I love country music. So like Luke Bryan, Tim McGraw to me, just growing up, those are the guys. And then all my kids know this. I have Taylor Swift is my girl, Kyle. I love Taylor Swift. So like all this Taylor Swift hate that I see on Twitter and all these places, it grinds me to my core. That's my girl, Taylor Swift. We're same age. We grew up together. That's how I say it. My kids love it. My younger daughters love it now. I am a big Taylor. I'm a Swiftie, and I am not afraid to admit that.
So you were 22 and 22 came out.
Yes, I was.
Did it come out when you were 22?
It came out whenever it was. I was whatever that age. Like when she came out with all that. Me and her, we're literally right there together.
Oh, awesome. Bonded. That's great. It's funny because my wife and I, again, long weekend, we went and visited my parents. So road trip this weekend, we listened to Red by Taylor Swift on the way down. And then on the way back, it's a double album. So we listened to both discs of Stadium Arcadium by Red Hot Chili Peppers. So that's a great call outs for both of them.
Yeah, I love those. Red Hot Chili Peppers is one of those ones that you just turn on whenever. You know what I mean? Like they have different genres, different music for whatever mood you're in. And that's definitely one of my favorites.
And just like a huge volume of albums and songs.
Yeah.
And it just keeps growing and keeps growing. They keep going. And I haven't read Flea's memoir. I have read Anthony Kiedis' memoir, Scar Tissue. But Zach here in the comment mentioning Flea's memoir, Acid for the Children, is pretty good. So I'd imagine a lot of similar stories to Scar Tissue, but maybe different perspective. And that's great. I love Flea. Love Anthony. Love them all. I guess, are you more of a movie guy? I guess that'll be the next one.
I do love movies.
And to be fair, I don't think anyone's disappointed by your artist and bands answered. So that was great.
Yeah, no, for movies, for me, if you've never seen The Prestige, I love The Prestige. It's Christian Bale is one of my favorite actors. So like anything with Christian Bale, I'm all aboard on that. Inception as well. Inception was one of those movies that I saw in the theaters that blew my mind. You know how you go to the movies sometimes and you're like, and before I'm older, so you didn't really have the social media buzz and stuff like that. So when I went and saw Inception, I had no idea what to expect of it. I just went and watched it. And before we had kids, me and my wife used to go to the movies all the time. And that was one of our favorites, just watching it in the movie theater. And then Apollo 13, I really like Tom Hanks as well, but Apollo 13 is one of those movies that I can watch. I feel like it's on TBS all the time. I just turn it on and it's there. They're in Shawshank, those two. And then football wise, remember the Titans is my all-time favorite just football movie. And then Friday Night Lights. I love Friday Night Lights, the movie. I love the TV show too, but the movie, those are probably my top 5. There's so many. I'm a movie guy. Me and my wife, there was times where we'd go sneak in the movie theaters, watch 5 in a day. That's before kids. Now the kids are here. I don't get to do as much, but those things are great. And then Top Gun, the new one, Maverick, the Top Gun 2, I thought that was a fantastic movie. That could easily be in here too.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's funny, we're ending with sports. And I guess the next, because if you're going to watch sports for a 3-hour game, you're going to want to eat. You need sustenance. So what are your top 5 game day foods?
So chips and salsa, baby, 101. I don't care what anybody says. Give me the chips and salsa, mild though, because my stomach can't handle that.
Really, the Portuguese and you can't handle the spice. Interesting.
I have a bad stomach. I got stomach issues that unfortunately I passed down to my daughters. But chips and salsa, 101, no way. And then wings to me, any type of wings. I don't care if it's boneless or not. You can call it a nugget. I don't care. Give me wings. I like bone in, bone out. I will eat all of that. And ranch, blue cheese, I like it all. There's no difference to me there. Pizza too, for me, just give me some pizza. I can eat Little Caesars. I'm not a pizza snob. I will eat whatever. And then the 2 special ones that sometimes my wife will make us, cheesy meatball sliders on Hawaiian, the Hawaiian bread, the little areas there. That's really good. She makes it kind of special. And then buffalo chicken egg rolls. So I actually think that's a slept on game day food. My wife makes buffalo chicken egg rolls. I love egg rolls. I love buffalo chicken. You put those things together, I can smash those all day.
Awesome. And we're going to stick with the sports theme here again for this last one. And again, knowing football guys, college football program, and the Devi Manifesto, that monster of a product, we'll say. It's massive what you guys do there. Clearly, you have a big interest in college football, and maybe it may not be your favorite fantasy format. It still seems like you enjoy it more for the just watching in the aspect of college, for the sport itself, and maybe even less for the fantasy. You have enough insight that you provide everyone else. That's great, but it seems like you really enjoy college sports. I hope so anyway, because that's why I made this question for you as top 5 favorite college athletes of all time.
Yeah, I love I'll give me sports all day. Like that's where it's at. Like I don't. College to me is a passion. Reggie Bush, number one. Give the man his Heisman back. Like, it's ridiculous he doesn't have his Heisman. All-time favorite athlete. Texas versus USC, best game I've ever seen ever in my life. The national title game. So Vince Young's on this list as well. So Reggie and Vince. I'm a Michigan fan, but that year I was transplanted into the Vince Young fan. Like, I was really rooting for him. I bought a Texas sweater, like all these different things. And being in California, I purposely was going against USC because all my friends are USC fans. Like, I was a big Vince guy. And then kind of Calvin Johnson in college. I know he was legit in the NFL. That dude was a monster in college football. Like, Calvin was one of those dudes that you're just watching, like, this guy's on a different level. Cam Newton, for the year that he played at Auburn, special, a lot of fun to watch for me. And I put Tim Tebow on here, and I know he gets a lot of shit ahead of places. Tim in college was a lot of fun to watch. Like, you saw him play his freshman year when he won the national title. He's back up. They kind of use him in special packages like the Wildcat. Then his junior year, obviously he won it. But like, he was just a special player, kind of that leader guy. And I loved watching Tim Tebow play in college.
I just looked up Calvin Johnson's college stats real quick, just because I was curious. His senior season is nuts at Georgia Tech. 76 catches for 1,202 yards and 15 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was Calvin was one of those guys when you were watching, and he didn't play with very good quarterbacks. So trying
just to like in the NFL.
I'm trying to think of what was the guy's name. Now it's gonna piss me off. But there's a quarterback who I used to always laugh about because literally he would just throw it up to Calvin, and like that was like their one play, and he never left. Like he was in. No,
because I remember he was awful in the CFL. I remember him playing in the CFL, and he just sucked. So
every quarterback at Georgia Tech,
there was no chance he was even going to the NFL. But it looks like that's who his quarterback was on his senior season, I think, or no? Never mind. I'm looking at the wrong thing.
It's his senior year. Whoever
Troy Smith went to Ohio State. You can hold that over Jeff.
Reggie Ball, that's who it is. So I just looked it up. Reggie Ball was the worst college quarterback I've ever seen. And that dude, Calvin, made him look pretty good. So like, that's all you need to know about Calvin Johnson.
All right. Yeah. I never heard of Reggie Ball. Yeah. I think a lot of people haven't heard of Troy Smith, he's a Heisman winner, and he can't even, clearly never even had a chance at the NFL. Couldn't even really make it that well in the CFL. But I remember watching him in the CFL, it was not very good. But that is not who we're talking about at all. We're talking about the good college athletes like Calvin Johnson, apparently, who, great college career. But thanks for all that insight, Kevin. It's I thought this was a perfect way to kick off the third season here of press coverage. So appreciate you very much for coming on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you for having me.
Jamie wants to know the cheesy meatball slider recipe. So I guess, Jamie, the one thing you could do is maybe DM Kevin on Twitter at DuBois_22, and that's where everyone else can reach Kevin. But if you feel free to let us know about all of the great work you're doing, Kevin.
Yeah, if you are in the Dynasty, the thing I want to plug is the rookie guide that we did. So it's a 1.0 version, 120 player profiles already. And it's legitimate. It's something that we worked on for 6 weeks, a lot of time, effort, and blood and sweat went in that thing. And if you like Devy or college football, we do have a Patreon. It's only $3 a month. We do all kinds of different content on there, weekly only podcast, rankings for Devy and Dynasty. And we create something called the Manifesto. And last year we did it, and this year it's going to be released in about, I would say, I don't know, like about a week-ish, once we get through the final edits. And essentially we go through every Power 5 conference. We do a depth chart, we do player breakdowns, we do rankings, we do mock drafts, everything in this giant manifesto, kind of like that. And it's the first edition, which is going to be released in the next 2 weeks, going to have 250 pages of content. So that's $3 a month. So I would go check it out if you enjoy that stuff. If not, no worries. But if you're in the Dynasty, the rookie guide is something that you should definitely take a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Kevin. Devy Royale started here and Going for Two Live. And again, seeing you guys grow and be part of Football Guys is just truly I appreciate the humble beginnings you had here on our network, but also the success you guys have had. It's well deserved, and all three of you are great. You Christian, and Jeff, and for anyone who remembers, did have Christian on last season, so I'd also encourage people to go back in the Going for Two Live archives on YouTube and check that out. I think that would have been May or June of last year. So the archives go back quite far. You'll definitely be able to find that. But yes, on behalf of Kevin, I'm Kyle Senra on Twitter at Senra Says. I guess before going out, we'll plug the sponsors one last time. Use the promo code GF2 on Underdog if you want to get that deposit match up to $100. I know Dan the B League Says, Ryan, Sear Foss, a bunch of Going for Two people are doing best ball drafts recently if you've seen them on Twitter. So if you haven't yet joined Underdog, now's your great chance, and use the promo code GF2 and they'll double whatever deposit you put in up to $100. But yes, Kevin, any final thoughts before we head out of here?
Oh, man, just want to say thank you, and I appreciate you having me on.
And again, really appreciate you, Kevin. Really appreciate everyone in the chat tonight. Jamie, Zach, Brian, Gator, and Jeff. Of course, Jeff, thanks for everything. Going for Two. If you want the hat and the shirt, by the way, goingfor2.com/store or ViridianGlobal.com. Same thing. That Viridian is our official merchandiser for Going for Two. So if you want to look like me, not so much the face and stuff, but the gear, you can definitely do that. And check everything out on goingfor2.com when it comes to rankings. I know we've got our rookie rankings out, both for Superflex and 1QB, as well as our dynasty rankings. The redraft, pre-draft rankings will come later on, of course, and weekly rankings through the season. And great shows every day of the week, basically, on the Going for Two Live network. I know tomorrow night, Speak on It. Wednesday night, Jeff will, of course, be on with the flagship armchair show, as he always is. Thursday night, this week, we do the Dynasty Gambit. Brian, the Dynasty Saturday Night 5. Hint, hint, it's on Saturday. Saturday nights, usually. So definitely great Dynasty content there. And next Monday, press coverage won't be back. Gladys and I we're going to alternate every Monday. So next Monday will be the 2-point conversion. Gladys and Jay will be back at that, like they were last week. So my next episode of press coverage will be March 6th, 2 weeks from now. And guest will be from the Dynasty Dads, Matt. I'll say his name this way because it's fun to say, Renshaw. Love Matt. And just a little hint at talking about, again, your humble beginnings, Kevin, here on the Going for Two Live network. First gig I ever had in the fantasy community was writing with the Dynasty Dads. So appreciate Matt for that. And again, your beginnings here on Going for Two and my beginnings there kind of made it, okay, these are the first two guests I'd like to bring on this season. And both happen to be teachers. So again, we're going to push that a little further and I guess teach you all about teachers, I suppose.
Yeah, no. Oh, yeah. Oh man. Yeah, you're having Renshaw on?
Yeah, it'll be on in 2 weeks.
Renshaw is my favorite. So give Renshaw a shout out. That's my guy. I love Renshaw.
Yeah, he's great. Can't wait to have that conversation. As much as I've wrote for them before, I don't think he and I have ever podcasted, so that'll be a fun experience. I've obviously followed him on Twitter for a long time and love listening to them on the podcast. But should be great in 2 weeks from now. But I thought this episode was great. So again, thank you, Kevin. Again, I'm Kyle Senra, and this was the third season premiere of Press Coverage. Bye for now.